this morning. I appreciate it. I have been coming to DSC for quite a while. I was an early fan of the work that Brian and Amelia were doing. And so when she called me and asked me, let me rephrase that. She texted me at 2:30 in the morning and said, would I come do this? Um, I absolutely leapt at the opportunity. It is a rare chance, I think, that we in the world of data get to speak to our peers, and we get to bounce ideas off of one another. And in this particular weekend, or couple days rather, I've had the opportunity to really engage on what is the future of the practice that we have all committed to in data, and I guess now we're calling it AI and everything there to the left of that. But what it causes in me is reflection, because my degrees were not in computer science. I graduated in the 90s, and I did not go to get a computer science degree. I was in active rebellion against the opportunity and the expectation that I was going to be a doctor, so I wouldn't even take math. I was like, nope, nothing that could indicate that I was going to do anything in this realm. And then the world of technology kind of opened up. And that's what I jumped into. But one of the biggest lessons from being a history major is if we don't really think about where we've come from, we are going to be destined to make some of the same mistakes again. And I feel like we're in another critical juncture of data right now where I'm choosing, you don't have to, but I'm choosing to take a step back and reflect on the past 25 years. And so bear with me for just a second. See if any of these thoughts kind of resonate with you. Maybe. Do you know how much I hate technical difficulties? I had to turn it on first. So, let's start here, because this is where I started. Do y'all remember that phone? How many of you can still do the buzzing sound? Anybody? Well, I was going to bring my phone up here and play it for you, but I left that back there. I started at Cellular One, and I started really just in the customer service department. I was doing some temp work, some weird stuff, but I was an early adopter of everything tech. I really was. Remember sitting in computer labs and typing in who is to find out who else in the world was logged on, and then that's how you engaged in chat. All right, that was me. Again, remember though, I'm completely social sciences, and that becomes important later. But I was still hanging out in the computer labs. I was still doing who is, and when this phone released, and I was at Cellular One, I was the first one to get it. And everyone was jealous. This was like prototype 0 phone. Like you could barely do anything, you know. But it was the coolest little thing because it fit in your back pocket. And so I loved everything tech at the time. I loved where I felt like it was going, but I also realized that we were still in two camps. We were in a camp where people talked about tech. I mean, they just talked about it, right? It was something that they were going to experience. But then there were those of us over here who loved it so much that we were playing with it, we were opening it up, we were exploring it, we were seeing if we can push its boundaries. And somewhere along the way, we're finding that those two language systems began to merge. And we started our trek towards creating a language, a vocabulary of technology. And many of us who are sitting in this room, especially those of us who are closer to gray, our titles, our job roles, our job descriptions, those were born with us as we took those jobs. There was no data engineers. There were no data analysts. All of us were technologists of some sort. We maybe got software engineer. And so to be part of a generation who is creating a language model that we are now trying to move forward as we look at generative AIs and what does that mean? What does machine learning mean? It started back when we were just trying to figure out how to talk to one another about the cool stuff that we were doing. Now, When I started in on my first tech team, my first big tech project was a big data project, except for we didn't call it big data at the time. We called it a big tech project. And I came in as a technical writer, or I like to call it a tech griot, because we were the storytellers. We were the people who were trying to articulate very complex data and technology, infrastructure and planning, and and it was the geekiest thing to try to translate into a consumable language, into English, so that people could read it and understand it. Y'all remember how voluminous those books used to be? Like, it was huge. I mean, they were paperweights, and nobody really wanted to read them, except, again, we're creating a language, so everyone had to read them. That's when O'Reilly was born. And so I started there. That was my first introduction into, hey, tech has to be something that can be approachable as much as it's going to be experienced. Does that make sense? Yes, it made sense. All right. So the unfortunate part, or fortunate part for me, is I got turned on, though, by the act of building. And so as much as I was trying to stay away from going in the medical field, I was really turned on by what was happening as they were modeling out the data. So that first big data project was transforming the EPA data from a mainframe into relational models. Now, in retrospect, knowing what we know today, we would never do that. We would never have taken it out of mainframe and tried to put it into a relational model. Not to mention how many of you were tortured by fourth normal form. Like, tortured. It was like torture. You had to take the most finite data element and try to make it so that it was very specific and couldn't be split apart again. That rationalization of data was the most torturous thing ever. And fast forward to where we are today, we have structured data, we have unstructured data, we have binary data. Now we understand better the complexities of data. That fourth normal form really was only a methodology to enable the data to be accessible, right? And now we've been able to model so many different ways of accessing data. We have metadata, we have reference data, we have graph databases at this point. We are so far away from fourth normal form. But let me tell you what, and this is just my experience leading big teams and big projects. The engineers that are willing to stop for a second and sit down with the data and understand it with the rigor that we had to when we had to model fourth normal form, those teams are more successful than the teams who are running fast to get to the end. Because that understanding of how that data is going to operate together, how it's going to knit together, how ultimately it's going to be requested, what problem statements can be asked of it, that is a modeling art that I don't see us committing to anymore. And it causes so much problems on the other side of consumption. If we spent more time up front really understanding the structure of the data, the intention of it, and the meaning of it, and how it's supposed to interact together, we would quickly see when we don't have the data we need to actually be able to make it decisive later. So I'm still an advocate of torturing my teams. I am. Just ask them. A couple of them around here. The other thing that I really dove into over the past 25 years, and again, this is definitely me owning all of the age that it looks like I have on my head. I was part of those open source projects, and I loved them. I love them. For those of you who don't understand what that was, it was like 2000s, late 90s, and you would have groups from all over the world coming together to try to build a platform of some sort that could initialize some big movement of technology, right? These were, for me, the one that I particularly enjoyed the most was a group of women from around the world who would get together, and we were working on Drupal. That was it's an open source platform. You can go and look up the history of it. But we were adding features to Drupal. What was awesome for me is that by day, my teams were largely male. My teams were largely white. I was working on a problem statement. And while we had amazing, creative, innovative people, we were focused on just what the problem statement was for the customer at the time. I was also a mother of young children. And so by working as a career mother, there wasn't a lot of time that I had for social outlets. And so what working on these open source projects enabled me to do was to experience being a technologist while it also being a creative art, while it also being a social outlet, while it was always something new that we were developing together, and everybody was from all over the world, so I got the different perspectives and intentions and value systems and thought processes, and I embraced that. I have not had that type of experience since, but that experience undergirds how I approach the world of technology and data as an executive today. The other thing for me that came out of kind of this open source movement was that while we were going to experience, and I'll talk about it in a second, a bit of intellectual property and skill set aggregation in a lot of the big companies, there is a theme in open source that understands that true technological evolution is going to require that the innovation be adaptable and open to the human experience and condition at any time. And sometimes, those of us who have experienced large companies, that type of innovation can stagnate because the ROI isn't always there. But in open source projects, man, that philosophy, that ability to move quickly together, it was unparalleled for me. Then there was the big tech bubble. Y'all remember that house of cards falling? I mean, some of us in here may have lost a little bit of money in that time. That was fascinating, though. If you think about technology from a historical perspective, right, which we do need to teach, I think, in K-12. We still teach the Industrial Revolution, but we've not yet applied academic scholarship to understanding the evolution of technology over the past 50 years. And I think it's about time. I think 50 years is long enough for us to be able to develop a canon so that we can go from the Industrial Revolution to the Technological Revolution. But with that being said, one of the fascinating things to me that came out of that bubble burst was the understanding that tech for tech's sake was gone. We had advanced in technology enough that we were understanding that it still must have a product or a service that it was presenting, that the excitement that we were feeling as technologists building tech for tech's sake because it was cool wasn't necessarily going to indicate that it was going to be profitable. Didn't necessarily indicate that it was going to be productive even. And so now in this world of entrepreneurial acceleration and startups, the first question that I ask as a mentor, as someone who is often pitched to, as an investor, is what is the business model of your quote-unquote app? Don't bring me an app. I hate when y'all bring me apps. Apps don't do anything. Tell me what the business problem is that you are solving, that you are using technology to make efficient. That is when, with that transformation, that tech bubble enabled us to understand that tech and data were going to become utility. That we had laid that foundation. With that crash, we knew we had arrived. We were an industry. And it was also in that moment that the industry began to split into two. There were those of us who did infrastructure and those of us who did data. And so it's like the difference between dealing with somebody who is a plumber and someone who is dealing with air quality or water quality. And I chose water quality, right? So these were the things that I have been kind of mulling over in my head. And so here I am now, 25 years in. More than likely, any title that I have usually wields the title chief in it, which means, man, on a daily, I miss fingers on keyboards. I do. I miss it. I miss being in the trenches, being in the cubes with everybody, having this idea. And every now and then, my teams will let me sit in and do some things, but it's not often. And a long time ago, they got mad when I would model the data in my head and tell them where they were going to be. And they were like, no, you couldn't have done that. And I'm like, double check it. And so I miss that. But what I will say is that more of us need to make that leap. More of us need to take all of those 5 things that I talked about and make a commitment to executive and/or legislative leadership. We must, because if we do not continue to refine the language around what we are doing, we are continually causing our neighbors harm because we don't have the executive power or the legislative understanding to neither regulate, which is sitting there on the horizon, but nor to keep our customers safe, because we're migrating back to tech for tech's sake. And I'm going to come back to that when I talk about AI. But what is the issue? So now we're in these corporations. We're committed to being executive. We are executives who used to have fingers on keyboards, so we know exactly what the engineering stack should be. We know exactly what the risks are. We know how to calculate ROI, and we get excited by the salaries that we're going to get. And yes, I said that out loud, because we do. And don't pretend like we don't. We do, because we're engineers, and we're worth that value. However, we get so courted by that the number one killer for innovation in any structure is executive attrition. Because once you have a proven track record one place, you get courted to the next place, which means those problem statements, those answers for that evolution of innovation in that company get stagnated because the executive champions leave and they go to the next thing. I don't know what the answer to that is. My only request is that you consider how long you're willing to be committed to solving a problem statement on behalf of a corporation or an enterprise or a team, and adhere to that commitment, because that by itself is stifling a lot of innovation when we have moved out of open source and moved a lot of the innovation into corporate structures of R&D. And those, they get stagnant in the R&D. So that's just a 2. The health of your data is going to indicate the health of your core technological infrastructure. That's just a fact. If you want to take a temperature on how healthy your infrastructure is, where does it need to be shorn up, where can it be reevaluated, take a temperature on the quality and the gaps in your data. Now, of course, we can say, well, some of that is garbage in from a human perspective, but I'm going to get to that in a second. We spent decades. How many of you all went through a failed ERP? Or 2, or 3? Like, has there been a successful one? I don't think there's been a successful one. But what those lessons taught us is that people, processes, technology are important. And I'm going to say that again in a second. But what we need to understand is, as we were making all those first investments into technology, and then we did it again with the move to the cloud, we didn't necessarily bring the data along with it. And so going back and thinking about the lessons of fourth normal form, being able to look at the quality of information that is increasingly important in our enterprises requires us to have the infrastructure in order for it to flow with quality. So if you want to know how good or how bad is your technological infrastructure, go check out your data. If you want to know, however, how successful your strategic vision is going to be for your enterprise, you have to check your people, processes, and technology. Because it's there that you're actually going to be able to determine whether or not your strategic plan for that year is going to be successful. Most strategic plans that are coming out of C-suites at this point in time require there to be some type of technological evolution. It's requiring some type of KPI or metric evaluation to determine its progress. And it has to start with people who understand all of that. And so as you are starting to plan your strategic opportunities for a period of time, you, as the leaders of a company, must consider these three things. Well, the problem is not enough of us sit in those meetings. So that's my appeal again, that we start taking seriously when we are thinking about our career path, to think about executive training, to think about executive management, because the companies are in dire need of those of us who used to engineer these systems to explain what the strategic value and what the strategic requirements are in these three areas. Culture. If one more person tells me we're going to build a data-driven culture, like, what does that even mean? Are we going to roll out math classes? Are we going to, like, what does that mean? And yet, I have not met one enterprise that did not say, we need to build a data-driven culture. I just had a conversation, it was a wonderful conversation, with a gentleman backstage who gave me the example of having automated customer service, where they were using text, speech to text, as opposed to having people literally on the call and typing in what their problem statements were from the customer. And so they were able to drop their workforce by 45%, or 45 minutes per call, so therefore they're able to reduce their workforce, right? So that also means, however, that as they're backfilling for attrition, they're going to backfill at a slower rate, which is cool, but they're also going to have to move the role up, because now you're not really talking about people who are doing data entry. Now you're talking about people who are analyzing and solutioning, right? Which, if you get enough similar cases, what are we going to do there? Engineers. We're going to automate that too, right? And then we're going to cut that workforce. So now we have everything up front, customer coming in, that's automated. We now have, except for anomalous conditions, we have that automated. And that is what people are afraid of, right? That's what our neighbors are afraid of, is that people like you and me, we show up and we start cutting jobs because we start automating these roles, right? But what they're not understanding, too, is that now we have to create a new set of roles. So now when you're talking about culture and you're talking about a data-driven culture, you're really now forecasting out. Once automation is complete, does that mean that people don't need to hear a human voice anymore? Because I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that in some cases where we are really trying to we're frustrated, I don't want to hit 5 on my phone. I don't. I don't want to hit 5. I don't want to hit 0 and then be wrapped around to, is this problem or that problem? I don't want those decision trees. And so the line of evolution that has to take place between going from text to speech to actually meeting the human experience is still quite lengthy. And the people who are going to have to build that user experience we've not trained them yet. The people who are actually going to have to design for the human experience so that they still feel heard by our technological advances, That is a degree of human experience engineering that we don't have yet, and that we're going to have to fail at this a long time before we're going to be able to have that role really defined and that technology really solid. That is the opportunity that we have. And again, if we are not translating this evolution of technology back to our neighbors, we're causing mass panic. Because I think what we are doing is replacing them, and what we're really asking them to do is take a new job. I go back to when I graduated, I started as a tech writer, and every title I have had since was defined when I got there, as many of you. And that trend is going to continue, but only if we can communicate it well to each other and to our neighbors. Does that make sense? Did I overtalk that? Like we gotta do better. Then there's this one. Do y'all know that data has the longest tail of return on investment? I cannot tell you from a consultant's perspective how many times I sit in C-suites and they're like, Vida, that all sounds real good, but when is it gonna make me money? Data probably won't for a very long time. Data by itself just tells you how successful your own business is. It as a product is very unlikely unless you are literally building a data product to go to market with. Other than that, the act of refining your data makes your business better. It yields efficiencies. It can tell you where things are broken. But I think for a long time, and again, I'm going to back up almost to that ERP thing, y'all know about data warehouse projects and data mesh projects and data fabric projects and data lake projects. Has anyone been on a successful one? Like, have they had a beginning, middle, and an end? Because I haven't met a beginning and middle end lake project. I met a swamp project, dumped in a couple of those, but a truly beginning, middle, and end on a data project that yielded what they were sold, not always. And so we need to change how we're talking to enterprises about these things. We need to explain that when they're asking their divisions for KPIs, whoa, that's a data thing. When they're asking for increases or decreases or efficiencies, and they need to understand how that is operating, that's a data thing. Like we can do this over and over and over again. That is how we're going to go back and get to that data-driven culture. It's because we're doing better explaining that data has become ubiquitous, that it has already achieved its return on investment because it is enabling you now as an enterprise, as executives, as directors, as board members, to be able to oversee the business with a great deal more clarity. That it by itself is not necessarily the ROI, but it is the fact that there is quality in the air that you can breathe. That is the biggest difference with what we do as data executives from what we used to do. All right. This is my hot button topic. Let's really talk about this. All right. We are now in pop culture, again, creating mass panic. Why? Because we are really doing a lot of tech for tech's sake. We are finding some really cool ways to engineer data to talk back to us in a language that we think we understand. I'm going to say there's some probably big boulders out there that we should probably begin to solve for before they become a problem. Take them all with a grain of salt. We can talk about it later. I'll be milling around. 1, can we maybe take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm? Can we start there? Like, this is a step before legislation. This is a step before the Bill of Rights. Like, can we just start with, we not trying to hurt people? Okay. 2, Can we agree that the language models that we are using might be a little restrictive? Because I promise you, if I say, bless your heart, regeneratively in Utah, they may not really understand what I said. They might think that we're going to hug and pray. We're not there yet in our language models where we are understanding the full human experience of expression. And we are restricting people to really just understanding a very narrow, expressive corridor of language that, from the perspective of the little black girl in me, may not absolutely reflect who I am, nor the way I talk. Me and Google, as it tries to answer my sentences, we get in this fight all the time. That's not how I talk. That's not what I sound like. And I like 4-letter words and 10-letter words together. Imagine that. So we're not there yet. Can we say out loud that we acknowledge that we're not there yet? That we're not absolutely reflecting even the American experience, which I think is both the best and the worst place to build these models out. But if we don't agree, and this goes beyond the biases that we were talking about 10 years ago, we are now talking about active experience reflection in language and its articulation. That's what we are talking about. And we're not there yet, y'all. All right, so we're not there. Can we also agree that we probably need to take a step back and decide what we want the future of AI to be? Now, I'm going to go back to both the open source and the tech bubble, right? We are an active tech for tech's sake. Y'all, I played with ChatGPT. I played with another one too. Do you know what we did? We changed the language model and we ran it against Lauryn Hill's catalog. Yeah, I need to hear what I said. We ran it against Lauryn Hill's catalog, and we expected the answer to reflect how Lauryn Hill would have answered, how do you eat a Reese cup? It was metaphorically laden. Let me just put it like that, right? We don't know what we want this to be. We don't know the pathways that it's going to go. We don't know. But what we do know is that we want to try and fail. But if we're going to take the try and fail approach, think about the tech bubble, but think 10 times worse, because we're not just going to lose money. We're actually going to leave people behind. We're going to leave whole swaths of cultures and values and ethnic dispositions and norms, and we're leaving people behind. And that seems like that's an ethical question, and it is an ethical question. But now I'm going to put my corporate executive hat on. It is also a corporate pipeline issue. Because if we're already feeling a labor shortage in these key areas, and now we're restricting who technically can have access to engineer these because of the way that we've restricted the way that we're presenting, we're not going to have the people to do this. And so, yes, it's an ethical question. It is an evolution of the issue of bias in machine learning. It is an evolution of that. But it also is an issue for our industry and is an issue for the enterprises that we support. And so can we get back and have a rigorous conversation, an engineering conversation about what this is and how we need to actually roadmap it out with a bit more rigor and a bit more strategy and stop waiting for the bubble to burst because we did tech for tech's sake? Because the burst on this bubble might just be worse than losing money. I'm done that soapbox. I am. But that was this whole talk, that was the soapbox. That's what I was trying to get to. Y'all hear me? All right, with that, I want to thank y'all for being here.